In the hushed corridors of history, inevitable tragedies resonate with an eerie and enduring mystique, captivating the imagination of generations. Among them, the enigmatic tale of the Dupont de Ligonnès family stands as a chilling enigma, weaving a web of intrigue that continues to confound and fascinate. In April 2011, the idyllic city of Nantes, France, witnessed a scene straight from the depths of a psychological thriller. The bodies of Agnes Dupont de Ligonnès and her 4 children were discovered buried beneath their terrace, victims of an apparent mass murder. However, the patriarch Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès was conspicuously absent. As authorities embarked on an investigation that would capture global attention, the intricacies of this family's life unfurled, one replete with privilege, secrets, and hidden desperation. The Dupont de Ligonnès tragedy goes beyond typical crime tales, exploring wealth's darker side, hidden truths, and facades. If you're a fan of true crime documentaries, prepare to be riveted by a story that defies conventional understanding. Don't forget to smash that like and subscribe button so you don't miss out. The Dupont de Ligonnès family appeared to lead a life of prosperity and comfort. Hailing from Nantes, France, they were seemingly a typical upper-middle-class household residing in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, the father, portrayed an image of respectability, while Agnes Dupont de Ligonnès, the mother, was a central figure in the family's life. Their 4 children, Arthur, Thomas, Anne, and Benoit, were well regarded, attending school and participating in social activities. However, beneath this facade lay hidden struggles that would later come to light. Agnes and Xavier seemed to get along, but they had hidden problems. They'd been having trouble in their marriage since around 2002. Agnes talked online about how Xavier acted very judgmental, got into fights quickly, was too strict, and worked like he was in the military. Regrettably, the intimacy that should be a cornerstone of any relationship was conspicuously absent. While this might sound disheartening in itself, the situation was bound to deteriorate even further as time progressed. For Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, the burden of financial instability was a relentless specter haunting his life. Despite hailing from an affluent background, his quest for steady employment proved a formidable challenge. His ventures, including attempts at managing a hotel guide and launching a membership card program, proved unsuccessful in generating significant income. The family primarily relied on Agnes's money, which was running out by 2011. Xavier got into a lot of debt and felt very desperate. He had an affair in Paris and borrowed 50,000 euros from his lover because he was desperate. In an email in 2010, he said he was in a bad situation and might do something terrible. He said he considered burning their house down or killing himself so Agnes would get money. He thought his life might end soon if he didn't get 25,000 euros immediately. He said he often felt like he was in a nightmare and wanted to do something big to end it. In early 2011, weeks before a tragic event, Xavier's father passed away, leaving behind Xavier to sort through his belongings. Despite his father's financial difficulties before his death, Xavier inherited a .22 caliber long rifle. Surprisingly, he embraced firearms, getting a license and visiting a shooting range. Yet, things took a disturbing turn as he acquired a silencer for the rifle in March. In the lead-up to the family tragedy, Xavier made unsettling purchases, including cement, lime, bullets, and cleaning supplies. These actions and his sudden interest in firearms cast suspicions on him amidst the Dupont de Ligonnès family murders. Leading up to the family's mysterious disappearance, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès prepared for an unexpected move. He packed his vehicle with belongings, settled debts including school fees, and closed family bank accounts. The family's home's lease was terminated with mail redirection instructions. On April 11th, he informed the children's schools about relocating to Australia due to a sudden business move, while a similar message was sent regarding Agnes's resignation. These actions added to the enigma surrounding the case, as Agnes's supervisor couldn't reach her after her abrupt departure. April 1st marked the first hint of an oddity, with Arthur Dupont de Ligonnès missing his wage collection. Yet by April 3rd, the entire family was seen dining contentedly together at a restaurant. This meal, however, was the last time Anne and Benoit were seen alive. Anne and Benoit were absent from school the following day due to sickness. Thomas returned to school briefly, but was called back by his father, citing a family crisis. They shared a restaurant meal on April 4th. On April 5th, Thomas visited a friend and messaged them that evening. The final known sighting of Agnes Dupont de Ligonnès is a subject of some discrepancy. Neighbors distinctly recalled observing observing her on April 5th, as reported by RTL. Although certain neighbors asserted seeing her walking her dog outdoors on the evening of April 7th, many investigators believe that her demise likely transpired around April 5th, rendering that particular timeline improbable. Around April 11th, following the family's last sightings, Xavier and Agnes's relatives received a typed letter purportedly from Xavier. However, it lacked a signature and contained unusual grammatical errors inconsistent with his writing style. In this 4-page letter, Xavier claimed he was part of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and that the family was entering the U.S. Witness Protection Program. Communication and the children's social media access were to be restricted. The letter detailed how to handle their possessions. Furthermore, Xavier indicated that he had entrusted his car to a family friend. However, this detail was proven false when authorities subsequently located the exact vehicle abandoned outside a hotel room in southeastern France. Notably, the letter's most telling component emerged in its middle section, where Xavier cautioned against approaching the rubble on the back terrace. Additionally, the letter urged family members to perpetuate the narrative Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès had propagated, asserting that the family had relocated to Australia for business purposes, framing it as the official version of events. Around this period, neighbors residing near the Dupont de Ligonnès' family's home observed an unusual quietness, as there was no sign of movement in or out of the house over the preceding days. This lack of activity was remarkable for a household with 4 active children. On April 13th, a concerned neighbor reported her suspicions to the police, prompting an inspection of the residence. However, the initial search indicated no disturbances within the family. While some beds lacked linens and specific photographs were absent, the police interpreted this as evidence that the family had voluntarily packed up and departed. However, Agnes's relatives were less convinced. Perturbed by the peculiar letters alleging the family's relocation to the United States, they grew increasingly suspicious. They argued that it was implausible for her to suddenly depart without bidding farewell. Their skepticism persisted, intensifying the belief that something unusual had transpired. Consequently, the police revisited the residence multiple times, conducting 6 visits. According to details from La Parisienne, on April 21st, during the police's conclusive visit to 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann, the remains of Agnes and the 4 Dupont de Ligonnès' children were at last uncovered. The backyard patio concealed 2 separate graves, one containing the remains of Agnes, Anne, Arthur, and Benoit, and another where Thomas was interred individually. These findings marked almost 3 full weeks since Agnes and 3 of the children had last been sighted. On the subsequent day, April 22nd, a post-mortem examination was conducted on the remains. Agnes Dupont de Ligonnès and 3 of her offspring, Arthur, Anne, and Benoit, had been shrouded in blankets and interred within a singular grave beneath the patio. In a distinct grave, Thomas was laid to rest, presumably a day or 2 after his mother and siblings, as reported by Le Figaro. Adjacent to the remains were diminutive religious symbols, suggesting a potential ceremonial aspect, as highlighted by O Magazine. The autopsy findings disclosed that all the children had been sedated with sleep-inducing medications, followed by being shot twice in the back of their heads with a .22 caliber long rifle, according to details from the local. Agnes had also sustained 2 gunshot wounds, although her system showed no traces of sedative substances. However, investigators took note of her use of a sleep apnea device, which had ceased functioning sometime during the night. Consequently, it is likely that she too was assassinated in her slumber. Despite 5 violent homicides, no signs of blood were discovered within the residence. Even the family's 2 Labradors, who had last been heard barking on the night of Tuesday, April 5th, were subjected to gunfire and subsequently interred. Notably, one figure was absent, that of the family patriarch. Xavier swiftly ascended to being the primary suspect of the police. On the immediate succeeding day, an international arrest warrant was issued for Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, giving him a 3-week head start on the authorities. As the tendrils of uncertainty continued to tighten around this confounding case, one question emerged like a whisper in the wind. Where had Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès disappeared to, and what could possibly drive a man to orchestrate such a mystifying act? While the efforts to clean the crime scene were carefully planned, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès didn't seem concerned about hiding his escape. There were no signs that he was trying to run away. Instead, investigators believed he might have been planning to end his life after his journey. The police could easily follow where Xavier had been. He stayed in his Nantes home for a whole week after the murders. People living nearby saw him coming in and out of his house. On April 8th, a Friday, he posted online and sent emails to his family using his home computer. Finally, on April 11th, a Monday, he left his house and started traveling south. A speed camera caught his car during the trip. He stayed in a hotel in Blagnac that night in the southwestern part of France. After that, he continued moving. On April 12th, he went to Vaucluse and stayed at the Auberge de Cassagne for the night, but he used a fake name to check in this time. The next day, he continued going southeast and spent the night of April 13th in a hotel in La Seine-sur-Mer, west of Toulon. On April 22nd, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès's car was found by the police, a day after the bodies were discovered. Using security cameras and tracking his credit card usage, law enforcement traced his path across southern France. His last appearance was on April 14th, leaving Hotel Formule 1 in Roquebrune-sur-Argens. The following day, April 15th, he left the hotel, abandoned his car, and vanished with only a backpack. The Roquebrune-sur-Argens terrain, with its cliffs and mountains, provided potential hidden spots for a body. As Xavier's actions didn't seem aimed at evading the police, investigators speculated he might have intended to revisit meaningful memories in southern France before considering ending his life there. The search for Xavier's remains began in Roquebrune-sur-Argens and its surroundings in late April. Despite exhaustive efforts, no proof emerged. With Xavier's location unknown, investigators pondered if the entire journey was a ploy to bewilder law enforcement. The idea that Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès had thoroughly planned his disappearance seemed plausible. For nearly 10 years, authorities have unsuccessfully sought Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès. A turning point appeared in July 2015, when a photo, supposedly of Xavier, arrived at a Nantes journalist's hands. The image displayed his children, Arthur and Benoit, with the message, "I'm alive," and the date July 11, 2015, along with Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès's name, as per RTL. Nonetheless, the letter's origin was never traced, prompting doubts about its legitimacy. Recent times have seen incorrect Xavier sightings. In 2018, a tip led police to a Roquebrune-sur-Argens monastery, suspecting Xavier was posing as a monk. Despite a search, the individual remained elusive, noted O Magazine. In 2019, a man believed to be Xavier was apprehended in Glasgow, Scotland. Initial fingerprint matches proved wrong after DNA testing, per France 24. There are no new leads on Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès's whereabouts. With each false trail and ambiguous clue, speculation swirls. Could Xavier be orchestrating an intricate game of cat and mouse, skillfully evading the grasp of authorities, or does his disappearance lead down an entirely different path, one shrouded in motives still waiting to be uncovered? While we can't say for certain, the baffling nature of his vanishing act leaves room for both intrigue and uncertainty, fueling a seemingly endless array of theories and possibilities. Only time will reveal whether Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès will emerge from the shadows, bringing the answers that have eluded investigators for so long. On a typical day in Texas, as officers diligently carried out their border inspection duties, an unforeseen event unfolded. A federal agent was forcibly taken at gunpoint, leaving his abductors to vanish into the expansive South Texas landscape without a trace. It took precious minutes before the agent's absence was noticed. The urgency of the situation became clear. Fueled by the commitment to their colleagues' safety, his fellow officers resolved to locate the culprits, apprehend them, and ensure justice prevailed. In today's video, we will delve into the troubling and unforgettable events that unfolded on that fateful day. We'll take a closer look at the law enforcement's remarkable dedication and relentless efforts as they work tirelessly to bring those responsible for these shocking events to justice. But before we dive into this compelling story, if you enjoy true crime documentaries and want to stay updated with our latest content, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our upcoming posts. Now, let's get started on this gripping journey into a real-life mystery that shook a community and tested the resilience of those committed to upholding the law. In January 1984, on a seemingly normal afternoon, the Texas border checkpoint carried on its usual rhythms. Faces passed through, but fate had different plans. A Texas-plated car arrived. Custom Inspector Jose Torres began a routine ID check. However, suspicion arose when the driver showed a baptismal certificate as ID. Torres, a vigilant border guardian, redirected the car to a secondary checkpoint, where Customs Inspector Richard Latham took over. Latham, thorough in his duties, questioned the driver, who claimed U.S. citizenship. Even an INS officer believed him, but Latham, deeply committed to his duty, stayed cautious. He checked the vehicle with determination. Suddenly, a detective from Del Rio, Texas arrived urgently, reporting a jewelry store robbery in Ciudad Acuña, Mexico. 4 Hispanic men were involved and 1 spoke English. Panic spread, fearing the robbers might try to enter the U.S. Customs inspectors heightened scrutiny, but as 5 p.m. neared, the checkpoint fell silent. Inspector Latham had vanished during an examination of a gray Pontiac Grand Prix, with 3 or 4 Hispanic men matching the robber's description. The driver even wore an El Paso baseball cap. It was chilling. Latham's abduction had happened right under their noses. Kidnappers had disappeared into the vast Texan landscape, leaving an eerie void. U.S. Customs Service Special Agent Dennis Harlan took the lead in searching for their colleague. They swiftly identified vehicles that had passed through the Del Rio port around the time Latham disappeared. However, obtaining the names and addresses of the vehicle owners from the DMV database proved challenging due to outdated technology. In their determined effort, the Del Rio police collaborated with witnesses to create a composite image of the driver. This painstaking process resulted in a portrait that was shared with various law enforcement agencies. Authorities began searching the region for a gray Grand Prix, driven by the person in the portrait, but they had limited information about the passengers. Customs Service helicopters supported ground teams in their challenging search, but the vast wilderness of Texas made their prospects seem bleak. It had been an hour and a half since Latham went missing, and the vehicle was moving discreetly at 55 miles per hour, making it difficult to pinpoint its location within a sprawling 20,000 square miles. The search area continued to expand as time passed. Eventually, the DMV database provided a list of 8 Pontiac Grand Prix owners. 6 of them were located in Del Rio, but the remaining 2 were associated with El Paso, a 10-hour drive away according to the suspect's claim. In a race against time, law enforcement authorities were determined to solve the abduction and murder of Inspector Richard Latham, a horrifying crime that deeply shocked the community. It all started with a call to the nearest FBI office, where a custom agent informed Special Agent Don Weatherman about the kidnapping. Weatherman quickly assigned the task to El Paso Field Agent Charles Riley, who faced a tough challenge. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't locate the Grand Prix vehicles connected to the crime, and time was running out. Working with local police, they set up roadblocks around the port, but the leads didn't pan out. They used fixed-wing aircraft to expand the search area, but the suspects seemed to have vanished. Meanwhile, in El Paso, Special Agent Riley ruled out one vehicle owner but focused on Ricardo Cortez, who had a criminal record, as a potential lead. Amid these developments, a grim discovery near Eagle Pass added a horrifying twist to the case. They found a lifeless person wearing a U.S. Customs uniform. The urgency to connect the pieces of the puzzle grew as suspicions pointed toward jewelry thieves driving a gray Pontiac Grand Prix. As the investigation progressed, Trooper Art Corral's gut feeling led to a crucial moment. He stopped a car with 3 Latin males, sensing something was off. The taxi driver from Eagle Pass admitted he was taking passengers to Presidio, Texas. Even though their green cards checked out, none matched the description of the suspect Grand Prix driver. FBI agents arrived at the scene of the tragic discovery, confirming Latham's fate. He had been bound with his own handcuffs and brutally shot. The handgun used was a .38 caliber and matched Latham's missing service weapon, revealing the ruthless nature of the criminals as cop killers. Amid the vast Texan landscape, the troopers persisted in their attempts to establish radio contact. After a few anxious moments, a voice came through the static saying, 329 checks on 3 subjects. This message marked the start of an important series of events. With sharp focus, dispatch officers started background checks on the people in the taxi. They got a surprise when the results suggested a potential match. Jesus Ramirez, sitting in the back, raised suspicion due to an outstanding DUI warrant under the same name. To confirm his identity, they had to act. They decided to chase the taxi on the highway, and after signaling for it to stop, the driver complied. After checking the driver, Trooper Corral approached the car to talk to Jesus Ramirez. Corral urgently tried to speak with the passenger in the back, but the man seemed disoriented. Corral kept pushing, not realizing that this ordinary traffic stop would soon turn dangerous. Out of nowhere, a gunshot rang out, turning the situation from an investigation into a life-threatening crisis. Corral and his partner had no time to call for backup. They had to react fast. Filled with adrenaline, Corral's partner grabbed a shotgun as they took Rafael Calderon out of the vehicle and secured him behind their squad car away from any weapons. Their next concern was the man in the back, Jesus Ramirez, who had shot himself in the head with a .357 caliber firearm. As they collected the weapons, the .357 and a .38 caliber revolver, the troopers wondered why a routine traffic stop had escalated so violently. Slowly, they started piecing together the puzzle. One trooper retrieved Ramirez's identification and a piece of paper from his jacket, while the other examined Rafael Calderon's possessions, which included firearms, a large knife, and a cloth bag. The troopers sensed that Ramirez's self-inflicted demise was not a reaction to a mere DUI warrant. There had to be a deeper motive at play. The troopers called in the incident and learned that Latham's body had been discovered. Customs agents and the FBI believed the highway shooting was connected to the Latham case and flew to the scene. When they arrived, they reviewed the evidence. Along with the .357 Ramirez used to kill himself was a .38 caliber handgun, a service revolver later determined to be Inspector Richard Latham's, the gun that killed him. In the pillowcase taken off Calderon, they discovered tens of thousands of dollars of jewelry that matched the items stolen during the robbery in Mexico. They also found a handwritten bill of sale for a 1975 Pontiac Grand Prix taken from the dead man's jacket. It transported the seller's name, Ricardo Cortez, the first suspect identified hours earlier. Rafael Calderon, now in custody, revealed crucial information during an interrogation conducted by FBI Special Agent Moses Solanes. Calderon disclosed that Jesus Ramirez had orchestrated a jewelry store robbery in Mexico, hoping for an easier escape route than committing the crime in the U.S. During the heist, Calderon, Ramirez, and an unidentified man named Carlos executed the robbery. At the same time, Ricardo Cortez served as the getaway driver. Customs Inspector Latham discovered the stolen jewelry during a border inspection, leading to a tense standoff. As they left the port, Cortez and Carlos overpowered Latham and disarmed him. Calderon revealed that Ramirez had taken control, deciding that Latham had seen too much. Tragically, Ramirez used Latham's own service revolver to shoot him twice in the back. Afterward, they crossed the border back into Mexico via Eagle Pass, where they sorted through the stolen jewelry at a motel. Calderon and Ramirez planned to transport the jewelry back into the United States, while Cortez and Carlos were to keep the car in Mexico for a few days before reuniting in El Paso. With Rafael Calderon's narrative, investigators pieced together the puzzle, identifying the four suspects: Calderon, Ramirez, who had died at the traffic stop, Cortez, the driver of the Grand Prix Latham search, and an unknown man named Carlos. The investigation took a surprising turn when Mexican State Police found some of Latham's things in Piedras Negras, just across the border. This included his wallet, a police mace canister, and important papers like traffic citations for Calderon and Carlos Peña. Within a day of the kidnapping, authorities identified Carlos Peña, a Mexican resident in the U.S., as the fourth suspect. They got his photo from the Immigration and Naturalization Service and started looking for Peña and his buddy, Ricardo Cortez. El Paso police received a tip about an apartment where Cortez and Peña might be hiding. FBI Special Agent Charles Riley organized an operation, sealing the area and using ground and air units. Despite a thorough search, including SWAT teams checking each apartment, Cortez and Peña remained elusive. U.S. Customs Agent Dennis Harlan stressed the importance of relentless police work. A break came when Mexican State Police found an abandoned gray 1975 Pontiac Grand Prix in a nightclub parking lot. FBI agents checked the car, but Mexican law limited their examination. They carefully documented it and found fingerprints matching all four suspects. In El Paso, agents continued searching for Cortez and Peña. They discovered Peña and the deceased suspect, Jesus Ramirez, had lived in the same apartment complex. The apartment manager recognized Peña and said they'd been moving boxes from a gray Grand Prix into an apartment. A third man, Ricardo Cortez, had also been there. They left in the Grand Prix, leaving a blue car behind. Agents hoped the blue car would lead to Cortez. They watched and waited until a man, not Cortez or Peña, drove off in Cortez's car. Agents discreetly followed him to a bar where he handed the keys to the bartender. He claimed he was asked to retrieve the car but didn't know where Cortez was. This story checked out with the bartender. The focus remained on catching the remaining suspects in the Richard Latham kidnapping and murder case. Investigators requested access to Cortez's girlfriend's phone records after she denied knowledge of his whereabouts, and the search continued. 2 days later, Cortez called his girlfriend, who remained silent about his location. However, agents traced the call to an El Paso motel. Special Agent Charles Riley, along with local law enforcement, moved in. The SWAT team surrounded the motel. Cortez was arrested. 8 days after Richard Latham's murder, Texas authorities had Ricardo Cortez in custody. Searching Cortez's motel room didn't reveal Carlos Peña's whereabouts. With Cortez and Rafael Calderon in custody and Jesus Ramirez taking his own life during a traffic stop, Peña was the last suspect still on the run. Cortez's account of the murder differed from Rafael Calderon's. Cortez claimed that Calderon, not Ramirez, had fired the fatal shots after the traffic stop by the Texas state troopers, and Ramirez had committed suicide. This caused some confusion during the investigation. Cortez and Peña had fled to Juarez, Mexico, according to Cortez. The FBI sought help from Mexican authorities to find Peña, who was believed to still be in Juarez. A reward offered by the U.S. Customs Service pressured Peña to contact the El Paso FBI office, expressing his willingness to surrender. He was apprehended at the Santa Fe Bridge on the Mexico-U.S. border. Both Cortez and Peña provided consistent accounts, pointing to Rafael Calderon as the shooter responsible for Richard Latham's murder. Following their arrest, a federal grand jury in San Antonio indicted Calderon, Cortez, and Peña on multiple charges, including conspiracy and assault on a federal officer. They were also convicted of state offenses, including capital murder, for their roles in Latham's abduction and murder. The perpetrators of the kidnapping and murder of U.S. Customs Inspector Richard Latham faced justice for their crimes. Here are the outcomes for each of them. Rafael Calderon was charged with the assault and murder of a federal officer. Calderon pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Ricardo Cortez was allowed to plead guilty to conspiracy and assault on a federal officer. He received a 23-year sentence. Carlos Peña pled guilty to conspiracy and assault on a federal officer and received a 23-year sentence. In the face of tragedy, the law enforcement community came together with unwavering determination to ensure that those responsible for the abduction and murder of Inspector Latham faced the full weight of justice. The tireless efforts of his fellow officers and friends served as a testament to their unwavering commitment to seeking justice for one of their own. Richard Latham's memory lives on, and his sacrifice is commemorated with reverence. Memorial services were held at the Del Rio port of entry, a solemn reminder of the sacrifices made in the line of duty. Across the nation, U.S. Customs officers joined in a moment of silence, honoring Inspector Latham's memory and showcasing the profound respect and unity that binds the law enforcement community together. If you found this story compelling and thought-provoking, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more updates on stories that touch our hearts and challenge our minds. And as you reflect on the strength of solidarity within the law enforcement community, remember to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. Until next time, bye. In the world of true crime stories, this one definitely hits hard and reminds us of how cruel people can be. The story of Junko Furuta, a regular high school girl who went through something unimaginably awful. It's not an easy story to hear, but it's a look into the dark side of human behavior that we all have. As we learn about what Junko endured, we enter a place where her innocence was shattered, and her ability to understand and care for others seemed to disappear. The things that happened are like a journey into madness, a constant stream of cruelty and degradation that makes us question humanity. It's a story we must remember to remind us of the terrible things that can be hidden in society. If you're a fan of horror movies, remember to hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next post. Furuta's beginnings can be traced back to Misato in the Saitama Prefecture. She resided there with her family, including her parents, older brother, and younger sibling. Throughout her teenage years, she was a student at Yashio Minami High School, simultaneously held a part-time position at a plastic molding factory, starting in October of 1988. This job served as her means to save up for an upcoming graduation trip. Additionally, Furuta managed to secure employment at an electronics retail store, a path she aimed to follow after completing her education. Among her schoolmates, Furuta earned esteem due to her academic accomplishments and consistent attendance. Beyond her scholastic pursuits, she had aspirations of becoming an idol singer. On the evening she was abducted, she excitedly awaited the conclusion of the TV series Tonbo. The perpetrators of the appalling incident were a group of 4 adolescent boys: Hiroshi Miyano, Joe Ogura, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe. Using the upper floor of Minato's location as their gathering point, the group had a history of unlawful activities such as theft, coercion, and sexual assault. Miyano, the leader of the group, exhibited a record of troublesome conduct from an early age, including theft and deliberate damage. Although he initially enrolled in a private high school in Tokyo, he left his studies the following year, establishing the groundwork for increasingly serious criminal behaviors. At the time of the event, he cohabited with his girlfriend, who happened to be the older sister of one of the group members, Yasushi Watanabe. Miyano worked in tile installation, aiming to sustain their plans of matrimony. However, his dissatisfaction with his income drove him to engage in more severe illicit actions, putting strain on the relationship and ultimately causing its dissolution. On November 25, 1988, Miyano and Minato wandered aimlessly through Misato with bad intentions of theft and attacking local women. At 8:30 p.m., they saw Furuta riding her bicycle after work and planned their cruel move. Minato forcefully knocked her off her bike, while Miyano pretended to coincidentally approach her, offering to help. Once Furuta trusted Miyano, he sexually assaulted her in a warehouse and later in a hotel, using threats against her life. He bragged about these acts to Minato and their associates Ogura and Watanabe, who had a history of gang rape and a recent kidnapping and assault of another girl. Around 3 a.m., Miyano transported Furuta to a nearby park where Minato, Ogura, and Watanabe awaited. Having obtained her home address from a notebook in her backpack, they coercively informed her of their knowledge, warning that harm would befall her family through Yakuza connections should she try to escape. Overpowering her, they transported her to a residence in the Ayase district of Adachi, initiating a horrifying ordeal of gang rape. This house, belonging to Minato's parents, transformed into their nefarious headquarters. By November 27th, Furuta's parents raised concerns over her disappearance, prompting the captors to orchestrate calls where Furuta falsely reassured her mother that she had willingly left home and was safe with friends. Employing psychological manipulation, they dissuaded police involvement. When Minato's parents were present, Furuta was coerced into posing as his girlfriend. This ruse ceased when it became apparent that Minato's parents wouldn't intervene. They later admitted fear due to their son's escalating violence. On November 28th, Miyano introduced two other individuals, Tetsuo Nakamura and Koichi Ihara, into the Minato household. They convened in an upstairs room where Furuta sat, clothed in attire Miyano had stolen. Posing as if intoxicated by drugs, they coerced Furuta into a fearful attempt to flee. Miyano and Ihara physically subdued her while Nakamura positioned a pillow over her face. Disturbed by the commotion, Minato's parents investigated, but were deceived by Minato's assurances that all was well. The group then proceeded to sexually assault Furuta while she remained semi-conscious, gazing unblinkingly at the ceiling. For 40 days, they subjected her to physical and sexual violence, inviting more men to participate. They forced her to do humiliating things like shaving her pubic hair, dancing naked, and inserting objects into her genitals. They also abused her with alcohol, cigarettes, and harmful fumes, causing severe injuries and malnutrition. The sustained abuse took an immense toll on Furuta's appearance, leaving her face swollen and nearly unrecognizable. Her body endured severe trauma, emitting a putrid odor that repelled the four perpetrators from any sexual interest. Consequently, they abducted and assaulted a 19-year-old woman who, like Furuta, was on her way home from work. On January 4, 1989, after losing a mahjong game the night before, Miyano felt really angry. He decided to take out his anger on Furuta. He poured a flammable liquid on her and set her on fire. Furuta tried to stop the fire, but she became unresponsive over time. They kept hurting her, even using hot wax from a candle on her face, putting candles on her eyelids, and forcing her to drink her own urine. She got kicked, fell onto a stereo, and started shaking and twitching. The four boys covered their hands with plastic bags because she was bleeding a lot and her burns were infected. They kept hitting her and even dropped a heavy ball on her stomach many times. This continued for about 2 hours until Furuta couldn't survive her injuries and died. Less than a day after she died, Minato's brother called him to say that Furuta seemed dead. The group was scared of getting caught for murder, so they wrapped her in blankets and put her into a travel bag. They then put her body into a big drum and filled it with wet concrete. Around 8 p.m., they put the drum into a cement truck and got rid of it in Koto, Tokyo. While trapped, Furuta had often told them that she wished she could see the last episode of a show called Tombo. Miyano found the tape of that episode and put it in the bag with Furuta's body. He later said he didn't do it out of pity, but because he didn't want her to come back as a ghost and scare him. On January 23, 1989, the police arrested Miyano and Ogura for raping a 19-year-old girl they had kidnapped in December. On March 29, 2 police officers came to ask them questions because they found women's underwear at their homes. During the questioning, Miyano thought that one of the officers knew he was involved in Furuta's murder. Thinking that Joe Ogura had confessed to what happened to Furuta, Miyano told the police where they could find Furuta's body. At first, the police were confused because they were asking about a different murder of a woman and her 7-year-old son that happened 9 days before Furuta was taken. That case still isn't solved. The next day, the police found the drum with Furuta's body. They identified her using her fingerprints. On April 1, 1989, Ogura was arrested for another sexual assault and then arrested again for Furuta's murder. Watanabe, Minato, and Minato's brother were also arrested. They also found out about other people involved in hurting and raping Furuta, like Tetsuo Nakamura and Koichi Ihara, who were charged with rape because their DNA was found on and inside Furuta's body. The young people involved in this terrible crime faced legal consequences, but it got a bit confusing. At first, the court kept their names secret because they were all young when it happened. However, some journalists discovered and published their names because the crime was serious. All four admitted hurting Furuta but didn't say they murdered her. Instead, they pleaded guilty to causing terrible injuries that led to her death. In 1990, the court gave Hiroshi Miyano, who was the leader, 17 years in prison. He appealed, but a higher court judge said he should stay in jail for another 3 years. So he got a total of 20 years in prison, which is a long time in Japan. He was 18 when Furuta was killed. After serving his sentence, Miyano went to live with his mom. But in 2018, he got arrested again for trying to kill someone by hitting them with a metal rod and cutting their throat with a knife. Yasushi Watanabe got an initial sentence of 3 to 4 years, but it was increased to 5 to 7 years later. Joe Ogura was in a juvenile prison for 8 years and was released in 1999. He even changed his last name to Kamisaku after being adopted. He's known for bragging about what he did to Furuta. In 2004, Ogura got arrested for beating someone he thought was involved with his girlfriend. He threatened the person, saying he knew how to get away with murder, and got 7 years in prison for that. Nobuharu Minato, now called Shinichi Minato, first got 4 to 6 years in prison, but later it was changed to 5 to 9 years after an appeal. Furuta's parents were devastated by the lenient sentences given to the criminals. They triumphed in the court case against Minato's parents due to the crimes occurring in their home. However, despite being ordered to pay $425,000 in reparations, the Minato family never provided a single penny to Junko's family. Instead, they channeled the money received from selling their house to Minato, Watanabe, and Joe upon their prison release. It's an unfortunate and complicated story, and the consequences for the people involved were varied and sometimes challenging to understand. After everything was over, in April 1989, Junko Furuta was finally laid to rest. It's sad, but a bit touching too. The company she was going to work for gave her parents the uniform she would have worn. They put it in her coffin, and then, during her graduation, the principal of her school gave her parents her diploma. But there's a brighter side too. The place where they found Furuta's body isn't a sad spot anymore. It's now Wakasu Park, a place where people can find some peace. It's a way to remember her while letting nature heal the pain. Thanks for joining us to learn about the tragic story of Junko Furuta. This heart-wrenching tale sheds light on the complexities of justice and the lasting impact of heinous crimes. What might have been different if the legal consequences were more severe? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Until next time, bye. A heartbreaking rejection, a vehicle engulfed in flames, and a mysterious chilling disappearance. Today's story has puzzled investigators for years. The date was June 10, 2006. It was a warm summer night in Auburn, Alabama. Lori Ann Slazinski had plans to watch a movie with her best friend. But as the hours ticked by, Lori never showed up. Her disappearance on that fateful night left everyone who knew her scrambling for answers and fearing the worst. What could have happened to Lori that night? Why did she disappear without a word? Who saw her last, and what could they tell us about her disappearance? These are the questions that have haunted the Auburn community for years. In this video, we will dive into the case of Lori Ann Slazinski, exploring the details of her disappearance and the efforts to find her. Join us as we unravel the mystery and seek answers to the questions that still linger. We will explain how her burnt car was discovered by the police and why her body has never been found. It's a chilling mystery that will keep you on the edge of your seat. On September 21, 1981, a beautiful baby girl named Lori Ann Slazinski was born in New York. Her parents were Arlene and Casey Slazinski. When Lori was just 13, her parents decided to leave the bustling state of New York and start a new chapter of their lives in the tranquil countryside of Alabama. Lori was a curious child, always eager to learn and explore. Her parents recognized her love for education early on and supported her dreams. They even bought her a mobile home near Auburn University, where she lived off campus in a popular trailer park for students. At Auburn University, Lori studied psychology and criminal justice, which became her passion. She excelled in her studies and graduated with honors in 2004. It was there that Lori met her best friend, Lindsay Braun. They bonded over their mutual love for helping others and decided to work together at a local mental health facility after graduation. But Lori's kind heart wasn't limited to her work. She loved animals and always had a furry friend by her side. Her beloved dog Peanut was her constant companion. When she wasn't spending time with animals, Lori was dedicated to her studies. She was a hard-working student who never backed down from a challenge. Even outside of her academic life, Lori was known for her warm personality and infectious smile. She had piercing blue eyes and beautiful blonde hair. Her ears were always adorned with earrings, and her spirit was as vibrant as her appearance. One of Lori's close acquaintances was Daryl Richard Ennis. She had met him at a local bowling alley where Ennis worked. Sometime in late 2005, Lori asked her mother if Ennis could join their family for Christmas. Without any hesitation, her mother agreed. Lori felt bad for Ennis. Apparently, he had no family to spend the holidays with. Lori and Ennis spent a lot of time together. It wasn't long before they became good friends. Lori was living life to the fullest, but little did she know that a dark cloud was looming over her. In the blink of an eye, her world turned upside down and darkness descended upon her. On June 10, 2006, Lori was excited to spend a fun evening with her best friend, Lindsay Braun. They planned to have drinks and watch movies at Braun's house. Lori called Braun around 6:30 p.m. and informed her that she had to stop at the store, then she would be right over. It was planned to be an enjoyable girls' night out. But something strange happened. Braun waited for her, but Lori didn't show up. Braun eventually became worried. The next day, Braun tried calling Lori's house but got no answer. She left many voicemails, but still no response. Braun's worry turned into panic when Lori didn't show up to work for a second day in a row. She rushed to Lori's home to check on her, but found no sign of her. The only one at the home was her beloved dog Peanut in his crate. Braun noticed something strange. The crate was spotless, and Peanut seemed well-fed and happy, as though someone had taken care of him. Braun then noticed that Lori's rugs were missing, as well as her trash can sitting outside, which contained her yard tools. Even more alarming, the answering machine had been unplugged and all the messages had been deleted. By this time, Lori's mother had also become worried after Lori failed to answer her phone. When she arrived at Lori's home, she was nowhere to be found. Panic set in and her mother contacted the police. June 13, 2006 marked the beginning of a harrowing journey for Lori's family as they filed a missing person report for their beloved daughter. Initially, the Alabama police treated Lori's disappearance as a typical missing person case. However, things turned dark when they arrived at Lori's trailer and discovered signs of forced entry at the front door. Scuff marks on the hallway walls suggested a possible struggle had taken place. Police discovered semen on Lori's bedsheet and traces of blood were found on the doorknob. A golden hoop earring and coat hanger were also found at the scene. Authorities would soon retrieve video footage from June 10, 2006, showing Lori shopping at a nearby Alabama Walmart. That was the last known sighting of Lori. Lori's family was helpless and could only wait for her to return. Finally, on June 13th, the phone rang, but it wasn't Lori on the other end. Instead, it was her friend, 25-year-old Rick Ennis. He told Lori's mother that he had seen Lori the day before she went missing and that Lori had gone to make a big drug deal. Lori's mother was devastated and refused to believe this. She insisted that her daughter would never do such a thing. She knew Ennis was lying but had no idea why. Ennis also told the police that they grew marijuana together and that Lori may have gone off to make a drug deal with some shady characters. However, when authorities searched Lori's trailer, they found no evidence to support Ennis's claims. On June 14th, the investigation into Lori's disappearance took a dark turn with significant development. Lori's car, a blue 2005 Mazda Tribute, was discovered abandoned and actively burning in the roadway on DeKalb Street. This shocking discovery was made just before dawn, and it sent shockwaves through the community. The location where Lori's car was found was in a cul-de-sac outside a construction site not far from her home. The site was nothing short of a nightmare. The authorities immediately launched an investigation, and they sent the car to a forensics lab for analysis. The lab report later revealed that Lori's blood was on the car door. This added to the growing concern that something terrible had happened to her. As investigators combed the area for clues, they found a hand-rolled cigarette near the car and a gasoline container in the nearby woods. The similarities between the gas can found and the one missing from Ennis's workplace raised more questions than answers. The question on everyone's mind was, Who would set her car on fire, and why? The investigation took a sharp turn from a missing person case to a potential homicide investigation. Detectives focused their attention on Ennis, who not only knew Lori but was also one of the last people to see her alive. When he was confronted by police, detectives noticed scratches on his arms and hands, which he failed to explain. It felt as if there were many holes in Ennis's story. Authorities were convinced he was hiding something, and they were determined to uncover the truth. The stakes were high, and time was running out. The revelation of Ennis's chilling past caused ripples through the investigation. A man who had already taken the lives of his own mother and stepfather was now a suspect in Lori Slazinski's disappearance. His mother, Dolly Flowers, was shot and beaten with a baseball bat. Ennis placed a rose on her chest and covered her face with a velvet shawl after he killed her. His stepfather, Eddie Joe Flowers, known as Elvis, was also shot in the face with a shotgun. Ennis's excuse for committing these gruesome murders in 1993 was he was just angry about his parents planning to move and he didn't want to leave his school. But what was even more disturbing was that investigators found a to-do list on Ennis that included killing his 3 stepsisters. Ennis had committed these heinous crimes as a young boy, only 12 years old at the time. He spent 9 years in juvenile detention before being released at the age of 21. But it seemed that his violent tendencies had not faded away over time. Instead, it was a dark and twisted past that added a new level of horror to the already mysterious disappearance of Lori Slazinski. As the investigation into Lori's disappearance continued, a new piece of information emerged. Lindsay Braun, Lori's friend, revealed that Lori had received a love letter from Ennis. However, Lori had made it clear that she was not interested in him romantically and planned to talk to him about it. Ennis admitted to writing the letter, and investigators discovered that he had also told friends about Lori rejecting him. This led investigators to search his car, where they found a knife, handcuffs, and cleaning supplies. Ennis was the prime suspect in the case, but authorities could not make an arrest without direct evidence or a found body. After being re-questioned by police, Ennis vanished from Auburn and Lori's case went cold. The investigation had hit a frustrating dead end, and Lori's loved ones were left to wonder if they would ever find answers. It's said that justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. And in the case of Lori Slazinski, it took 16 years for the wheels of justice to start turning again. Thanks to the tireless efforts of Special Agent Mark Whitaker, a cold case unit was established and Lori's case was reopened. After combing through the evidence, they came to the same conclusion that previous investigators had. Ennis was their prime suspect. But this time, they had a crucial piece of evidence that could open the case. A 2007 forensic report showed that Ennis's DNA was found on semen and blood at the scene of Lori's disappearance. With this evidence, the cold case unit built a strong case against Ennis. With the help of a former roommate of Ennis, they were able to recover 3 rugs that were missing from Lori's trailer, and one of them was found to have Ennis's blood on it. The case was finally coming together, and it was only a matter of time before Ennis would face the consequences for his actions. After a long and arduous investigation spanning over a decade, justice had finally caught up with Ennis. The man who had managed to evade the law for years, moving from place to place, finally found himself behind bars. Ennis had been tracked down to a small town in Virginia, where he was living a seemingly normal life, engaged to a school librarian, and working for a company that made portable living structures. His past had caught up with him, and on his 38th birthday, a task force of U.S. Marshals swooped in to arrest him. Ennis was charged with 2 counts of capital murder, one for burglary and the other for kidnapping. The wheels of justice were turning, and the process of transferring him back to Alabama was already underway. During all this, Lori's family was going through a huge loss. Arlene had already suffered the pain of losing her daughter Lori, and life had not been so giving to the Slazinski family. Her son Paul passed away soon after Ennis's arrest, and her husband Casey became terminally ill in 2020, leaving Arlene with an unbearable amount of grief. Finally, the case of Lori Slazinski's disappearance finally came to the forefront in March 2022. The trial began, but prosecutors were not allowed to bring up Ennis's previous conviction for killing his parents. However, in an exclusive interview with correspondent Peter Van Zandt, Ennis spoke candidly about his past, claiming that he killed his parents because he was abused by his mother and not because he didn't want to move. A different story than what he had previously stated. Despite Ennis's claims, no evidence was found to corroborate his allegations. As for Lori's case, Ennis maintained his innocence, describing her as a close and dear friend and saying that he would never have hurt her. The trial of Rick Ennis was a battle between the prosecution's overwhelming evidence and the defense's attempts to discredit it. Prosecutors presented a wealth of evidence that appeared to tie Ennis to Lori Slazinski's disappearance and murder, including his semen found inside her trailer and his DNA on a cigarette butt at the scene of her burnt-out car. Knives and handcuffs were also found in Ennis's vehicle, and scratches on his arm suggested a struggle with Slazinski. But the defense attempted to poke holes in the prosecution's case. They argued that police could have planted the cigarette butt. Ennis himself testified, denying any involvement in Slazinski's disappearance and claiming that the scratches on his arm were caused by his dog. He insisted that the rugs were purchased at Target and had nothing to do with Lori. In the end, the jury would have to weigh the evidence and decide whether Ennis was guilty or not. After a long trial and 2 days of deliberation, justice was finally served for Lori Slazinski. Ennis was found guilty of her murder and faced the possibility of the death penalty. However, in a compassionate move, Lori's mother and the DA agreed to take the death penalty off the table. So Ennis was sentenced to life without parole, which ensured that he would never walk free again. The murder of Lori Slazinski shocked the small town of Auburn, Alabama, and her disappearance remained a mystery for 12 years until the determination of investigators led to the arrest and conviction of Ennis. Lori's body has never been found. When the prosecutor asked Ennis, "Where did you dump Lori's body?" the only thing Ennis had to say was he was not involved in her disappearance. What were your thoughts on this case? A jealous ex-girlfriend, a missing marriage certificate from the crime scene, and a single bite mark on the victim's arm. This story left investigators and the community holding on to immense unanswered questions for over 2 decades. On February 24, 1986, in a quiet and peaceful neighborhood in Van Nuys, California, John Rutan came home and found his wife lifeless on the floor. The newly married 29-year-old registered nurse had been beaten severely, shot 3 times, and bitten on the arm. What appeared to be a burglary was far more sinister. But why did it take the police so long to identify the true perpetrator of the crime? Was the case what it seemed to be? And how was the case of Sherry reopened after it had gone cold? Join us as we uncover the reality behind the headlines and peel back the layers of this tangled case. We will examine the evidence and prospective suspects, the missing marriage certificate that was taken from the home, and the mysterious bite mark left on the victim's arm. Prepare to be surprised and ultimately moved as we unravel the details of this chilling case. Sherry Rasmussen was born on February 7, 1957 in Walla Walla, Washington. She was the adored daughter of Nels and Loretta Rasmussen, as well as the sister of Teresa and Connie. She was referred to as the sunshine in the room by those around her. It was said she could make whomever she was with smile. In addition to being a stunning and vivacious woman, Sherry was also ambitious and a very hard worker. Sherry initially aspired to become a veterinarian, but later chose to become a nurse. She got a degree from Loma Linda University and was moving up quickly in her nursing career. She enrolled in college at the age of 16, and by the time she was in her late 20s, she was the nursing director at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, giving lectures and instructing workshops for other nurses. As her academic life and profession progressed, she stumbled into a happy relationship with a man named John Rutan, whom she would later call her adored husband. John, who was born in 1959, enrolled at UCLA in 1978. He completed a mechanical engineering degree, and it was after his graduation that he met Sherry in 1984. It was love at first sight for both. People who knew the couple well claimed that John adored Sherry and that she was the type of person he had always wished to be with. Their love only grew stronger, and by November 1985 they got married and began a new chapter in their lives. The couple eventually went on and bought a house in Van Nuys, California. They both spent their free time exploring new restaurants and attending concerts. They were deeply in love, but someone in the shadows could not bear it. Back when John was a student at UCLA, he met Stephanie Lazarus, who was a political science major there at the time. Stephanie grew up in San Fernando Valley. As a child, it seemed she was always eager to impress others. In 1983, Stephanie joined the LAPD Academy, and in 1985 she became a patrol officer. Some described her as intelligent and hardworking, while others found her behavior mysterious and reclusive. Stephanie and John began dating casually. They didn't get close until after graduation. Despite having several hookups, they never formalized their relationship. John described his friendship with Stephanie as friends with benefits. That wasn't the case for Stephanie. She thought otherwise and was obsessed with John. John even claimed that Stephanie would frequently steal his clothes when he showered and would even take naked pictures of him while he slept. John, however, didn't take it seriously because to him, he was just having fun. The real turning point was when Stephanie discovered John and Sherry were dating. John told Stephanie about Sherry at his 25th birthday celebration, which she had organized for him. He admitted to having an intimate connection with Sherry. Stephanie was depressed when she found out that he was having a serious relationship with another woman. She went so far as to write a letter to John's mother in which she confessed her undying love for him and how the previous year had torn her up. Even though she was aware of John's engagement with Sherry, Stephanie begged John to come over and seek of closure. John concurred and did go see Stephanie. She begged him to return to her, but John had made up his mind and told her he was in love with Sherry. Stephanie then offered to sleep with him one last time, which John agreed to in hopes this would be the end of their chapter. What seemed like the end was only the beginning. Their marriage couldn't stop Stephanie from dropping by Sherry's workplace to let her know that things between her and John weren't over, and that if she couldn't have him, no one else could. Sherry began to confide in her parents, telling them about Stephanie's actions. She revealed to her parents how she frequently saw Stephanie standing outside in her LAPD uniform when she came out of her apartment. Sherry at times felt she was being followed. She was scared and anxious about it. Nevertheless, the fear was about to come to a terrible end. It was a loving morning on February 24, 1986. John and Sherry had been married for 3 months. Following his usual morning routine, John got out of bed and headed to work. Sherry was also scheduled to work later that day and had a motivational speech to deliver. However, she admitted to her husband that she was considering calling in sick. Despite John's encouragement to go and deliver the speech, Sherry stayed home. At 9:45 a.m., a neighbor noticed the Ruttons' garage door was open, but there was no car inside. About 15 minutes later, John made the first of many unsuccessful calls to Sherry. Her sister had attempted to contact her as well and thought it was odd she was not answering. John's stomach dropped when he contacted her workplace, and Sherry's secretary told him that she never made it into work. She wasn't returning calls, and the answering machine wasn't even turned on, so this was a cause for concern. Later that day, a maid employed by a nearby apartment complex claimed to have overheard 2 people arguing and something falling at about 12:30 p.m. When John returned home later that evening, he found the garage door wide open and pieces of broken glass all over the driveway. In addition, the BMW he gifted Sherry as an engagement gift was also gone. He knew Sherry would never leave in these circumstances without letting him know first. As John entered their home, he found something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His newlywed wife's lifeless body, covered in blood, was lying in front of him. Sherry had received 3 gunshot wounds. John couldn't believe his eyes. He immediately dialed 911. When police arrived at the crime scene, they launched an in-depth forensic investigation. The furniture was upside down, and a porcelain vase appeared to have been shattered over Sherry's head, both of which were indications of a struggle. On the wall adjacent to the panic button for the burglar alarm, there was also a bloody handprint, a terrifying scream for help that was ignored. In addition, Sherry had defensive wounds, a bite on her arm, a bruise on her face that seemed to be caused by a gun's barrel to drown out the sound. The fatal gunshots were fired through a quilt as authorities found the bloody quilt nearby. Investigators paid close attention to the bite mark on Sherry's arm and collected a sample from the wound in hopes the attacker's saliva could eventually be used to help find the killer. The LAPD concluded that Sherry was ambushed in the burglary attack after being taken by surprise. Sherry was dressed in a nightgown and underwear, making it evident that she wasn't expecting any company. Even though the maid from the adjacent unit claimed to have heard a fight, she didn't recall hearing any gunshots. She stated she didn't call the police since she believed it may have been a couple arguing. After the investigation in the apartment was concluded, police found no signs of forced entry, indicating Sherry might have let the perpetrator in. What is even more bizarre is the only thing that was missing was Sherry's and John's marriage certificate. This led to John becoming the prime suspect, but these allegations were dropped when his alibi checked out. He was at work until the evening, so there was no possible way he could have committed the crime. 10 days after the crime, police discovered the stolen vehicle 2 miles from the couple's home. It was unlocked and the keys were in the ignition. This, unfortunately, provided no evidence. Authorities attempted to check for fingerprints but were unsuccessful. It seemed they were dealing with someone that knew what they were doing. They either used gloves or they wiped away the fingerprints. Police moved on to interview Sherry's father. Nels was incredibly close to Sherry. Nels grieved by his daughter's passing. But there was one thing that bothered him. He didn't believe that his daughter, who was 6 feet tall and in good physical form, could be the victim of a botched robbery. Police told Nels the shots fired at Sherry were at close range, and the use of a quilt to mute the gunshot's audible impact proved that the murder was intentional rather than accidental. Nels provided police with a name he thought was responsible for the vicious and violent attack. That name was Stephanie Lazarus. Sherry had mentioned to her father many encounters she had with Stephanie. Stephanie frequently showed up at their home unannounced. She once brought her skis to the couple's home and requested that John wax them. Despite Sherry's objections, John concurred. This made Sherry uneasy since she thought it was odd that Stephanie was wearing attractive training attire. She was uneasy since she knew about what had happened between John and Stephanie in the past. John would explain to Sherry that there was nothing left but friendship between them. A few days later, after John had left for work, Stephanie returned to their flat to pick up her things. These visits alarmed Sherry, who asked John to ask Stephanie not to stop by their home. John, however, merely stated that he was unable to change the situation and advised her not to give it any thought. Sherry thought about going to the police about the harassment, but ultimately didn't. She feared that police officials would simply laugh at her. Stephanie also visited Sherry's office, where she told her that things between her and John weren't finished. She went as far as to say that if she can't have John, no one can. Police were unable to make any arrests based on Nels' statements because there was no concrete proof of this interaction. Police simply told Nels to stop watching crime shows and neglected any allegations. Even though Nels frequently confided in police and questioned why Stephanie wasn't being investigated for his daughter's killing, the investigation seemed to focus on one of two scenarios. Either John killed his wife in a domestic dispute, or Sherry was ambushed by a couple of burglars who panicked and killed her. However, no evidence from the scene could be used to support either pretended solution. 3 months after the crime, files about the case vanished from the police station. These files included journals of the entire case and every conversation between the police and Sherry's father. There were many audio recordings of the initial round of interrogations, but none of the remaining conversations that mentioned Stephanie could be found. The primary investigator, Lyle Mayer, had the suspicion that the burglar might have been a woman because bite marks are uncommon for male aggressors. However, the case went cold. Days turned into months and months turned into years. It wasn't long before Sherry's case was put into storage. But Nels and his wife never wavered in their resolve. They offered reward money for any information about the crime, but it yielded no results. Nels fought to have the case reopened for many years. However, investigators refused to do it. The investigation didn't pick back up until DNA testing was made accessible. Nels volunteered to cover the cost of the test for the samples of blood and hair. He was repeatedly warned that without a prospective suspect, these tests wouldn't help him. But out of desperation, he persuaded the authorities that he did have a suspect. But when it was time to run the test, every piece of evidence was gone. During this time, John had moved on with his life and started a new family. It is unclear when, but at some point he reunited with Stephanie. John called the detective and asked if there was any new evidence involving Stephanie to the crime. John himself suspected Stephanie was involved in some way, but that did not prevent him from sleeping with her from time to time. Stephanie also got married and quickly climbed the ladder in the police department. She had an impeccable reputation and became Detective of the Year 2 years in a row. In 2001, a new unit that specialized in unsolved murders stumbled on the case of Sherry. It was found among the evidence a piece of cotton that may have had the perpetrator's saliva. 2 years later, detectives sent all available evidence to the laboratory. Detectives had to wait until January of 2005 for the results due to the high demand. Among the evidence were nail fragments and blood samples. It was found they all belonged to Sherry. Investigators could not find the vial containing the evidence from the bite. After days of searching, it was discovered by a wall behind a large refrigerator as if someone hid it. After examining the sample, experts found foreign DNA from an unknown woman. The DNA was run through the FBI Combined DNA Index System database, but there was no match. A new group of detectives began looking at cold cases in 2009, since crime in Los Angeles had significantly decreased from earlier levels. When Jim Nuttall and Pete Barba reviewed the Rasmussen file, they studied previous evidence and materials left behind. Given that there was DNA from another woman found on the bite mark, they determined that the burglary scenario was not likely and they would have to retrace their steps. Knowing this, detectives believed the motives behind this crime were completely different. Then they compiled a list of all the women that could have potentially been involved in Sherry's murder. They managed to collect 5 names. Investigators considered Stephanie to be the least likely of the 5 candidates, considering her successful career in the police department. They had also read in the files that she and John had broken off all contact during the summer before the murder. 3 of the women were ruled out by their alibis, and the other, a former employee of Sherry with whom she had some disagreements, was eliminated by a DNA sample that was secretly taken. After this, Stephanie was the only suspect left. Given that Stephanie was still employed by the department and the rank she was in, Nuttall and Barba understood they would need to move slowly. Stephanie worked in the same building and in the same floor as them. When they began investigating Stephanie, they discovered that she had reported her off-duty gun as stolen 13 days after the murder. The gun was a .38 caliber revolver, the same type of gun that was used to shoot Sherry. What puzzled everyone, though, was that she reported her missing gun to Santa Monica police instead of her office. After reviewing and analyzing photos and reports from the crime scene, detectives concluded that the robbery seemed staged. The only missing item was the couple's marriage certificate, and the shooter was well educated on how the gun worked. The killer was able to wrap the gun barrel in a blanket in such a way that the neighbors did not hear a single shot. Even though a low-level, untrained thief could not possess such a skill, a trained police officer certainly could. She was then put under observation, and 2 weeks later, on May 28, 2009, her DNA was retrieved from a straw she drank through as her and her stepdaughter stopped at a cafe. Investigators got the sample and sent it to the lab. The following day, the results were ready. It was a 100% match to the DNA from the bite mark on Sherry Rasmussen. The detectives were in complete shock. It was difficult to believe that a high-ranking and respected officer was connected to the murder. Now that the detectives had proof, the only thing left was to make an arrest. They accomplished it in a very interesting way. They needed to get the person who outranked them to surrender their weapon before making an arrest. On June 5, 2009, detectives lured Stephanie in the basement where there were temporary holding cells. Detectives told Stephanie they needed the help of an experienced professional to interrogate an art theft. This was the field Stephanie specialized in. Stephanie agreed and went with them to the basement. She was instructed to hand over her pistol and then enter, which she did. As they got closer to the cells, she realized there was no suspect. Detectives gradually laid out the cards on the table and began asking her questions about Sherry's murder. Stephanie quickly declined all allegations. Detectives then announced that they had obtained the killer's DNA and asked Stephanie to provide her DNA sample to compare. At this moment, Stephanie declined to provide her DNA and refused to answer any more questions without a lawyer. Stephanie was detained. She was held in the Los Angeles County Jail after being arrested. For almost 6 months, no bail hearing was held. Both parties were taken aback when Judge Robert J. Perry put the amount at $10 million in cash, more than twice what the prosecution and defense had originally sought. He claimed that because of the compelling evidence against Stephanie, she was likely to attempt to leave the country or get weapons through her husband. She denied her involvement and insisted on her innocence. The case hearings began in early 2012. Prosecutors claimed Stephanie's motive for the crime was jealousy. After being found guilty of first-degree murder, Stephanie was given a term of 25 years to life for first-degree murder and an additional 2 years for personal use of a firearm. According to a subsequent investigation, the case files implied that one or more people intentionally collaborated to conceal information that might have shown Stephanie's guilt during the first investigation. It took 23 years to solve the cold and terrifying case of Sherry Rasmussen, a tale of heartbreak, betrayal, and toxic jealousy. However, even though the investigation has been completed, there are still a lot of unanswered questions. How many people were truly involved in covering up the murder? How did Stephanie get away with murder for 23 years? Sherry's parents, Nels and Loretta Rasmussen, finally got the much-needed justice for their daughter, despite the fact that Nels had asked detectives to look at Stephanie from the very beginning. Let us know your thoughts below.